Guys, I'm Adam from Boutinot Wines and I work in the Northern on-trade sales team. Very lucky today to be with Alisdair Tulloch from Keith Tulloch Wines. So I've got the joy of interviewing you and find out a bit more about you.
Pleasure's mine, mate.
Nice to meet you. So as you can see, I've done some nice interview prep here.
Yeah.
Maybe like a proper serious interview. And I think we'll start with the tough questions first. What does Ripper mean?
Ripper? Well,
Yeah.
Ripper is actually just a shortened version of the full word, Bloody Ripper.
Right,
of course.
okay.
Ripper is Australians' way of saying great, but, you know.
So
you
it's a good word.
Yeah, it's done with a bit more gusto.
Okay.
Like, you take a wicket as a bowler,
Okay.
you'd be pumping and going, Bloody Ripper.
Bloody
Yeah.
Ripper.
Yeah, Bloody Ripper,
Is
yeah.
that good? Is that believable?
You could do better with the accent, but yeah.
Right.
No, that's you pretty much nailed it. Yeah.
Okay, so it would be fair to say Keith Tulloch's Ripper Wines, your wines are awesome.
Yeah, that's about as good a kudos as we could get.
You happy
Yeah.
with that?
Yeah.
I believe it. I tasted them yesterday. I drink them all the time. They're fantastic. So,
Thanks, sir.
listen, I think it's just a great opportunity for people to get to know you. For us, we've had a talk. We know all about you, but the other people that watch this maybe want to find out a bit more about you as well. So, you know, generation game we've got here is just tell me a bit about your winery, your family, and I think that's a really important message to kind of put across.
All right. Yeah. Generation game. I guess if we are keeping score, I'll be getting 5 points.
Okay.
So 5 on the board in terms of my family's been making wine in the Hunter Valley since 1895. My great-grandfather, he was owned a general store, and when one fella racked up a fairly hefty debt, he settled that debt with a parcel of land, and that became the start of 5 generations of winemaking.
All right.
In the late 1990s, my dad decided to set out on his own, get really back to the roots of what winemaking was all about. So he set up his own brand, separate to what all of the other family had done, with new vineyards, new winery, and new ideas.
Okay. So when did this start? Like what year are we talking about?
Yeah, well, he was working over in Europe in the 1995 vintage in the Northern Rhone, and he came back and started setting up the company in 1997. First harvest was the start of 1998.
Okay.
And so, I mean, the sort of start of our wine business was there, but it really kicks off when you get grapes in the door.
Yeah.
That's when you start, when you have a vintage stamp that people can look at and say, you know, that year was when the wine started coming out. That was the start of something real. So, yeah, I've been working there pretty much since I was a young fella.
Okay. So what do you do?
I do a bit of everything.
So you're like
Yeah,
out of the pot doing everything?
Yeah, I mean, I work there with my grandfather. He's retired. He works in the vineyard. That's his kind of home. Dad works in the winery. He's been more of a winemaker than a viticulturalist, but in the sort of size of family business that we are, you've got to do both.
Yeah.
And I'm still young enough that I get to do the dirty work for the both of them.
Get your hands pink.
Yeah. Pink, brown, red,
Yeah.
black, whatever's going out in the vineyard or the winery that I'm there.
Okay.
Because, you know, the two of them have, like my granddad was my age in 1960. He's been working in the wine industry since he was about 15. I want to make sure I get out there and learn as much as I can from him. But as well, my dad's a winemaker who's in the peak of his career, and I want to spend as much of my time as I can working with him in the winery hands-on. Because, you know, apart from learning about wine, it's nice to spend a lot of time with your old man.
Yeah, absolutely. So they're your role models, I guess. And I imagine for your dad, your granddad was his role model. So
Yeah.
you learned the trade throughout from that.
That's right. He grew up working on my grandfather's vineyard. I've grown up working in his vineyard, so
Fantastic.
it's
Nice.
another piece in the puzzle.
Who else is in the family winery? Who else have we got?
Yeah, so mum and dad started the company together. They're the co-owners and co-founders, so it's 100% family owned, the brand, just between the two of them. And she's the general manager, so she's the spine.
She runs everything.
Yeah.
Right, so, okay.
Yeah, dad's probably the heart and the mind in what we're going to be doing in the future, and what needs to be done with the technical parts of the wines. But in terms of the spine of the business, that's my mum.
Okay.
She gets everything organised and holds it all together. My
Fantastic.
sister runs events and does a lot of administration and marketing with me. I'm also responsible for, in my way of including the winery, what I do in the winery with the marketing. I'll find special parcels and make sure that we get those into bottle in terms of the actual winemaking, but also getting that into literal bottles, literal labels, caps, and getting it all boxed up and sent to the right places.
So the whole so everything between the family, you've got it all boxed up.
Yes.
That's pretty cool, right? So
pretty much. The only thing that we don't do in the wine business is bottling.
okay.
There's a bottling line that's professionally operated to international export standards that's about 1.5 kilometres from the winery.
Okay.
So most of the wines that you'll see over here, the only time I've ever left our winery is to put on a truck, bottled 3 or 4 days later, and comes back to us.
Okay.
Under cap and with all of the QC that is required for the very highest standard in bottling, which I've got to say is a totally different science to making the actual wine.
Yeah. But all of that's a good thing, right? It makes amazing wine and makes consistency, doesn't it? So you're kind of like you're basically a domain winery.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right. That's the style that we're going for, particularly with our Field of Mars wines, where we grow 100% of the fruit ourselves.
Okay.
And
we'll talk about these a bit. This is the Field of Mars wines here. The semi-on.
Yeah, those are single block wines, and they're made in a style that is, you could definitely say, is domain, apart from the fact that it's bottled off-site.
Fantastic, great stuff. We'll get onto the wines in a bit, but obviously not forgetting the dog.
Lulu.
Integral part of the family is.
Yeah, and does that count as a 6th generation?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. She's Lulu. In terms of on our social media, she's definitely the most popular member of the family.
Nice. Does she have her own Instagram page yet?
No, not yet. Though the number of people that request that is, I think that probably it'd be in the hundreds that have asked for us to put an Instagram page up.
It could happen. Then. It's feasible.
If anybody's been to see the Wine Dogs pages, they've done some publications in the Napa Valley and across Australia, and I think I've done some work in New Zealand as well. They come out and photograph the dogs, and they make this beautiful glossy book. It's sitting on our counter when people walk in the door, and it's got gorgeous photos of Lulu and an older dog, Honey Jumbles, as well.
Honey Jumbles.
Honey Jumbles, yeah. You can tell. Can you tell I was in charge of the naming committee?
Yeah, definitely. Wow, it's a good one.
Yeah, but Lulu's, she'd be a 3-year-old little border collie rascal, and she needs constant running. She'll start rounding us up in the winery and trying to put us in a corner if we don't take her outside and give her some time in the vineyard. So
gets you out there in the vineyards and never too far away from your dad. She's like always there.
Yeah, legitimately. Anywhere she goes, anywhere he goes, if he's on the forklift, she'll jump up on the back. If he's running the pumps on a tank, she'll be sitting underneath the tank and making sure that if there's a pat to be had, she's not too far away from the action.
Love it. I suppose one thing before we move on to the area, I think one thing that you said yesterday that really caught me was that you go out and do the hand harvest yourselves as well. It's not all just contract harvesting, or if you work in a close knit, it's all about that family winery stuff again. Isn't it? You'll go out there and do the work, and your dad oversees a lot. He's quite meticulous in what he does, isn't he?
Yeah. Well, again, coming back to these Field of Mars wines, these small blocks we will go out and pick just on our own as our team, so we won't get anyone in at all, and we'll harvest between 2 and 3 tons of that fruit, depending on what the vineyard's giving us this year.
That'll take a long time, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When you think in a bunch of grapes, how many of those you need to have in the bins until you have 2 or 3 tons worth. We're out there all day. But when we're looking at making wines of the very highest quality, hand picking's something that's totally essential. And even when you're looking at when you have people coming in to pick for you, there's nothing that's quite at the same level as getting out there and doing it all yourself, getting your hands on every single bunch as it comes into the bin, not just looking at the bins and looking at what's happening, but getting your hands in the canopy.
You guys want to be there every step of the way to control the process and make sure the wines are perfect, right?
Yeah.
That's
During the harvest, when the bins are coming in from the vineyard, Keith's more often than not the one checking the bins and driving the tractor and keeping everyone in line.
So Dad oversees, Dad's in charge, and you guys follow dutifully along as you're told all the time.
Even the way that we built our winery, it's a 150-ton winery. We built it in 2011. It's in the inside, you feel like you're in a spaceship. It's totally state of the art, the cleanest place in the world. I mean, cool. You could serve dinner on the floor. It's probably the standard.
Lulu would definitely say that for sure.
Yeah. Lulu will attest to that.
Yeah.
But the way it was built means that he can stand in one spot and see absolutely everything that's going on.
Okay.
There's nowhere in the winery that he can't see when he stands in the centre of it. So when the fruit's coming in and all the action's happening, and we've got 3 or 4 guys all trying to bring in the harvest and maybe doing a couple of things at the same time, there's nothing that gets missed.
I think that's why, I guess that's why your wines are so precise and so pure, because you've got that control, you can just see everything and make it that way. So
yeah, every one of the grapes that comes in, from what we're doing out in the vineyard to what happens in the winery, gets his absolute focus.
Nice, cool. All right, so we think we've got a good feel for Keith Tulloch Wines and that kind of that family unit. You're all there, you're all doing it. So should we move on to talk about the area a little bit?
Yeah.
So obviously this is I drew this incredible map of Australia. I think it's perfect. Is it pretty much geographically correct?
Geographically, I'd say we've got the mainland.
Yeah.
I think we won't talk about those folk down there in Tasmania. They're an odd mob.
Yeah, exactly. That's not really relevant.
Yeah, not really. So as you can see from the map, if you've got good eyes, we're on the east coast. Where we are is about 2 hours northwest of Sydney. So if anyone's visiting Sydney, it's basically a day trip up from there.
Okay. Nice.
We have the region there its proximity to Sydney is no accident. Basically, when the Sydney colony was looking at what it could do agriculturally, there were vine cuttings brought across and planted around like Sydney, Illawarra, Western Sydney kind of areas, and some of the wines that were made quite early in the colony, we're talking about the late 1700s, early 1800s, had some signs of real promise. So they thought this area here is prime for viticulture. What happened then was viticulturalist called Sir James Busby, who was an Englishman who was obviously at the time we hadn't been federated and we were a colony. He came back to Europe, took cuttings of vineyard from all over Europe, and then
pre-phylloxera, wasn't it, that time? I think that's so.
Pre-phylloxera. So this was the early 1820s.
Yeah.
When he came back to Australia, those original plantings were done in Sydney, and a lot of the vines were taken to the Hunter Valley.
Okay.
So for that reason, we have a lot of original cuttings that were brought over from the James Busby clones, and that area's been producing there since the early 1830s.
Wow.
Commercially,
So
continuously.
It's kind of the birthplace in Australia of winemaking, is it?
Yeah, it's the oldest continually producing region, and it has, to my knowledge, the oldest producing wines in the country,
Right.
and some of the oldest producing wines in the world. Vines, sorry.
That's a pretty great claim to fame, isn't it? That's fantastic.
Yeah, when we're looking at what we have in the area, we're looking at our vineyards, looking at 20, 30, 40, 50, 65 and 95-year-old vineyards.
So you've got a block from 1923, so
Yeah,
that's 5 years old.
yeah. The Kester fruit is sourced from a block of vines planted in 1923.
Okay.
So a lot of wine regions around the world when it started then.
Yeah.
And so you look at the heritage that the area has and the quality of fruit that can be delivered from those old vines, and it's something that maybe gets taken for granted sometimes.
Yeah.
Certainly not by us, but I think people don't realise how long the history of viticulture is in our country, even though we're New World.
Exactly, it's fascinating stuff, isn't it? And I guess the next thing to talk about, I mean, you were saying about the temperature range.
Yeah.
So in terms of Hunter Valley, I mean, you're saying you're sometimes getting out there and it's 48 degrees you've had this year, but then also in the cooler months you kind of go down to -6 at night time, so you've got a massive temperature range. So it makes winemaking must be quite interesting and a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, I mean, the reason wine's interesting is because I mean we do our best to take the quality of grapes that express the variety that they are and the site that they're in. So the fact that the Hunter Valley has this amazing climate that swings almost 50 degrees Celsius between the winter months, hitting those -6, really frosty, cold temperatures that put those vines into their dormancy and give us that kind of temperate shift to the summer days where you're hitting almost 50 degrees Celsius, getting days in 2017 47 degrees Celsius, 2018 we had a day 48 degrees Celsius in the Hunter Valley.
That's hard to work in, right? I mean, for anyone, surely. Your grandfather's not out in that heat, is he?
He'll rally the troops at about 4:30
in the morning.
Yeah.
Get out
So
there.
we'll be going the light before first light that he's convinced is there.
Okay.
Like pre-sunrise. He's like, no. There's light in the sky. We've got to work.
Yeah.
Because you're racing the clock and that huge blazing ball of fire that goes.
It just
over
feels
the
like a
top.
little bit closer to you guys.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure that we've moved our side of the world slightly closer than yours up there. We really that sun hits us hard.
Yeah. So it's all done in the early morning. Get it nice. When you're picking as well, pick early, pick fresh. So it's cold. So
yeah, we want that fruit coming into the winery cold
Yeah.
for the best quality winemaking. So getting out there in the evenings when it's nice and cold, it's good for the pickers. It's good for us working, and it's really good for the fruit.
Okay, cool.
But the temperature shift of the Hunter, the warm spring and summer that we get, I think is a really big part of the character of the wines.
Yeah.
It's not just a thing in terms of the work that we do and the way it affects us as people. The more important thing is the way it affects the flavour of the wines, and I think it's why we have that unique Hunter Valley scent. The amount of sunlight and warmth that we're getting from the bud burst at the start of spring, the amount of sunlight that's hitting the leaves and the vegetative growth, and then being converted into carbohydrates and sugars for sugar that we can ferment to alcohol and flavour when we pick it at the end of summer, middle to the end of summer. That heat plays a big part.
Yeah. Okay. So it's essential to the wines you create, but how do you protect the grapes? Is it that hot? Do you have to kind of make sure you've got really good leaf coverage at the top, or the canopy has to be really protected?
Yeah, so the row orientation in the case of viticulture in Australia plays a big part.
Okay.
So in wine regions and countries where there isn't as much sunlight and heat, you'll want to try and protect, you'll try and want to open up the canopy and expose that fruit to the sun. Whereas in Australia, we, and particularly in our Hunter area, we'll want to protect the fruit from the sun. So we'll make sure that there's a dense canopy above the vine, which means that we've got to go in by hand and selectively leaf pluck to make sure there's just the right. You don't want total shading of the fruit. You want dappled sunlight occasionally striking the fruit, but not constantly baking the fruit all day, because it will lead to the fruit having like stewed, baked flavours. You can actually sunburn the grapes themselves, and the flesh kind of scabs over of the grape, which is not what anyone wants to have in their wine.
Scab is not a great word, is it, anyway? So
yeah, so essentially getting in and spending the time making sure that canopy has the right amount of protection, but an ample amount of sunlight at the same time, and clearing the inside of the canopy up a little bit so that there's airflow, nice cool breeze from the ocean that we get coming over, being about 50 kilometres inland. Really, you've got to keep that air moving through the canopy. It drops the humidity for the microclimate within the vineyard, and it's that combination of row orientation and canopy management's a big part of making sure that the fruit comes in with flavour, with sugar and clean.
Okay, perfect.
But
Cool.
the way we've set up the vineyards in the vigour that they have in the Hunter Valley, particularly with Semillon, it's a wine and a variety that comes to natural balance in our area. So we'll find we'll do much more work with the young vines, the new cuttings that we've put in that we're training up, or the younger blocks. But for the 40, 50-year-old blocks, they take much less management because the vines have adapted and been shaped over.
You've done all that work previously, so...
Yeah, the vines actually do learn.
Yeah.
So the way that viticulture's worked over the millennia now is that the vines will adapt to the shaping you give them. Older vineyards have learned the way that to balance themselves in the vigour that they need.
So like that 1923 blocks, like wise old people, basically, they know what they're doing, they just create great fruit and they don't work so hard, they just work sensibly.
Yeah, I'd say in the way that young vines are a bit like children. They're full of energy. You've almost got to put the brakes on them because if you tell a kid to go and run, they'll run until they fall over, right? And they'll constantly asking questions, motor mouth, what's this, what's that. Young vines are incredibly energetic, incredibly vigorous, and they'll try and fruit so much. They'll try and give you so much fruit, which sort of in a counterintuitive way is bad, because although lots of fruit sounds great, the young vine doesn't actually have the energy capacity within the storage of its trunk, within its vegetative growth, to support the amount of fruit that it might want to create. So it might sound horrible to you, but we'll go out from those really young vines and we'll drop half the fruit on the ground early in the year. So it's a process called crop thinning, and that's because we'd make more money if we cropped at 8 tonnes an acre, but if we crop at 4 to 2 tonnes per acre, the flavour's going to be incredible. It's going to be double the amount of flavour.
And that's what you want. Exactly.
And the relevance to the old vines is that those 1923 vines, they're cropping at 1/4 of a tonne to 3/4 of a tonne per acre, depending on the year. So in that analogy of like you've got the young kid that's the motor mouth, that's asking all these questions. The old vines, the wise old man doesn't have to say very much, but the few words that it says have that much more magnitude. The older vines, they yield far less, but the flavour intensity that's built into those berries, given that the vine itself has a larger structure, can hold more carbohydrates within the trunk, and it's producing fewer berries with more intense flavour, smaller berries, thicker skins, great for red wine.
Perfect analogy, really, isn't it? It's a great way for someone that doesn't know much about winemaking to really show the difference between young vines and old vines, really. It's a huge part of... Your dad really believes in that, doesn't he? He's big into that kind of analogy the way to explain and talk about vines, definitely.
Yeah, he's always explained to me since the very early days that vines are like people. And in that way, what we have to do in the management of our vineyard is to make sure that we're giving those vines all the support that we can to give them a life that's potentially 120, 130 years old. And if we can do that, if we can do the hard but basic jobs, getting out there, in being in viticulture, it's not rocket science, but it's very time consuming. You've got to be dedicated to working with every single vine, thousands of vines per acre, and we're looking at about 40 or 50 acres of viticulture that we're in charge of. You've got to spend that time with every single vine, every single year, to make sure that it has the balance. And then after a number of years, then it will start to manage itself.
Total labour of love, basically. Cool. Should we move on to talk about your wines then? What do you think? Yeah. So, I mean, listen, we've tasted them, we know we love them, but I think it's good to be able to explain to people what the wines are about, I think, So, I guess, what grapes do you grow on your vineyards?
So predominantly we grow Semillon. In the order we grow it would be Semillon, and then Shiraz, and then Chardonnay. And we also do we've been working with Rhone varietals more recently, So Marsanne, Roussanne, and Viognier, which we make a pretty interesting blend out of that wine.
This is the Epigee here, isn't it?
Yeah, the Epigee. So not really varieties which have been used in the Hunter Valley to any great degree. There's a interesting story behind the Marsanne, which was planted in our vineyards accidentally. So there's rogue vines that go throughout the vineyard when it was planted in the 1960s, not by us. My grandfather actually just went through and found those varieties inside of our vineyard when we first bought it. For him, it's as simple as
point them out.
Sam, Marsanne, Sam. So those vines, they're tagged and they're handled separately. And that way we actually have about, in our vineyard, about 10%, between 7 and 10% of it is just Marsanne, which not many people have in the area, particularly if they do. It's very unlikely to be the sort of age that we have in 50 years.
Cool.
So that's a smaller part compared to the parcel size of Shiraz, which is about half of the annual crush. Semillon and Chardonnay, that's really the key of the Keith Tulloch wine range.
Cool, so let's talk about the Semillon wines. Okay, so we've got this one first.
Yeah, that's our 2017 Hunter Valley Sem. So this is 100% fruit that we grow on our own vineyard. So we have 2 vineyards now. This is grown on our Hermitage Road Field of Mars vineyard, and so that you might recognise it's the Field of Mars wines up there.
Yeah.
Those are the specific block wines.
You noticed, they block 2A there, so you might not be able to see that on the camera, but yeah, so this is from the same vineyard.
From the same vineyard, this is the larger blend of our Hunter Valley Semillon fruit. So that wine, the vineyard that we have there is quite fine, grainy alluvial soils. The area of the Hunter Valley where we do our viticulture was a part of an ancient seabed about 250, 300 million years ago. And the sandy soils that have deposited into the creek areas, like where our Semillon vineyard is, gives the wine that minerality, that clean, fresh, bright flavour.
So is that where the purity comes from as well then?
Yeah, when we're looking at this wine, we want it to be focused and pure and fresh. We're looking at flavours, really citrusy flavours, grassy flavours. The wine has this unbelievable aromatic lift of citrus and even little hints of tropical fruit that come out on the nose. I don't think you'll find a wine which is more precise on the palate than Hunter Valley Semillon. It's fresh. It's got this line of incredibly focused flavour and a length of that citrus that can carry on for 30 or 40, 50 seconds after you've had it in your mouth. Amazing.
So what kind of food would you put that with?
Seafood.
So definitely
seafood. Yeah.
I mean, you're quite close to the sea as well, proximity-wise, aren't you? I know it's not always a given, but you know that style of wine, close to the sea, maybe it goes really well with some quite light seafood.
Yeah, absolutely. Any fresh seafood.
Yeah.
And it's one of those weird pairings that most people don't think of, but something like sashimi.
Okay. Yeah.
Perfect. If you're going for a seafood that has a creamy sauce, I'd recommend going with something more like the Chardonnay.
Yeah.
The Semillon, when you put it with that fresh seafood that isn't too ornated or not too decorated with other flavours, is just so good. It's like that squeeze of lemon lime that you put over your fish.
Yeah, absolutely. So the purity of the food, purity of the wine kind of harmonise together.
Yeah.
Cool.
That's what Sem's all about.
I guess, before we move on to the next one, just one really interesting thing that I didn't know about and you said is just how much juice you take out of these berries to make sure you get the purity of the fruit.
Yes.
So interesting.
Yeah, the winemaking of Semillon is absolute minimalism. What you're looking at is, for us, the purest expression of vineyard that we can possibly do in winemaking. So what we'll do is we'll get those berries in from the vineyard. It's not a long drive. It's a couple of 100 metres at most from where the fruit's picked. And while the fruit's cold, we'll get that into the press, which basically expands a bag against a large sieve, and that will extract juice from the berries and leave behind all of those solids.
Okay.
For something like Shiraz, you can extract up to 800 litres per tonne. With Chardonnay, you'll look at about 650 or 700 of litres per tonne. But with Semillon, we're extracting 500 litres.
Right, okay.
So-
Completely different then.
Yeah, so the number of litres difference that makes when you're looking at 30 or 40 tonnes of grapes is a lot of fluid that we're leaving behind in the berries.
Yeah.
And that's to make sure that none of the abrasive, skinsy compounds that are in solution in the skins are going to come out and affect the wine. We're looking at extracting lower amounts to give you fresher, brighter flavour. Once we've extracted that juice at that lower rate, we'll settle the juice until it's very clear in a tank, and the clear portion again will leave behind some more in the tank again. So the losses at this stage, you're looking at about 450 litres per tonne. From that stage, we'll ferment it with a very neutral culture of yeast that highlights those aromatic characters of the wine, and that's the wine made.
And that's it. And that's it. Simple, pure wine, but a big sacrifice in leaving all that wine behind, but you need that end result. So
Yeah,
that's what you get. It's beautiful.
that's why the wine just floats across the palate.
Yeah.
It doesn't have any astringency. It doesn't come down with a heaviness. It's just so light on its feet, but has this line and length that's something pretty special, and that's why people.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's why people really see Hunter Valley Semillon as something that's totally different to Semillons from elsewhere in the world.
Excellent. Okay, so Field of Mars Semillon, should we go on to that one?
Yeah, that's
So
the best block we have that we grow
Okay.
on our vineyard. It's a small parcel that's surrounded on all sides by creek beds. So when I was saying that those alluvial sandy soils deposited themselves around the creeks and in certain patches of the Hunter Valley, that still fluctuates from one block to another. 50 metres, the soil profile can change entirely. So we found the soil that has the very finest, almost beach sand. It's incredibly alluvial soil, and once we'd isolated that block as having the most intense and focused Semillon flavour, annually we'll keep that batch aside and release it as a single block under the Field of Mars label.
Okay, and that's the main difference you think between the two, is that kind of even more intense, even more focused wine?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we're looking at those wines 5 or 6 years from release, the primary intensity of the wine, that lemony zestiness, is still more present in that block 2A. If you're looking at which is what I highly recommend, particularly with the Field of Mars wine, its cellaring potential will push on even about another 5 or 10 years past the cellaring life of this, which is already about 25 or 30 years.
Okay.
So you're looking at one of the greatest styles of white wine for cellaring that you can get your hands on.
And that's a great thing, isn't it? Because so many people are drinking straight. You want people to drink wine straight away, but at the same time, you want to create a wine that can have its own legacy and be cellared and evolve over time, but still maintain that lovely purity. And it's a great thing to have.
Yeah, I think it's a very important part of wines in their ability to age. Not everyone will keep that for this many years. We all know that. So what we do is we make wines with a balance and style that will continue to evolve and be interesting for as long as our customers choose to keep them for. So when someone has a bottle of that wine, they can have the confidence of knowing that if they move house and it gets lost in a box and it goes to the bottom of the cellar,
Dust it off, pick it up, and fantastic.
Yeah.
Good find.
It's going to still be a stunner.
Yeah.
So we like to give people the ability to make that decision
It's very kind
if
of
they
you.
can.
Yeah,
Well,
fantastic.
we might keep a little bit for ourselves as well.
Yeah, I'm sure we can bring out a few back vintages. But
Yes.
okay, cool. Let's move on to the Chardonnay. So we've got here the Field of Mars Chardonnay. So different winemaking style.
Yeah. So the similarity between those two wines is the vineyards are about 100 metres away. So they're on the same kind of soil and they have an identical climate, being where they are. The row orientation is the same. The difference in the variety obviously has a difference in the flavour, but when it comes into the winery, we're handling that very differently, very traditionally. This wine, the Semillon, in the minimalist way that we treat it, we try and keep it very far away from oxygen as well, and we're using a pure culture of yeast to try and keep that wine as precise and clean as we can. With the Chardonnay, we're bringing it in and trying to handle it so that it ferments in the barrels with natural yeast. So when we're bringing it in, we handle it very differently. It's got much more contact with oxygen. I think you'll see that the colour of it's, compared to the Sems, a little bit more of that golden Chardonnay hue. We're putting it in 100% brand new French oak barrels, 225 litre barrels, and that's where they ferment. So rather than introducing a yeast, which gives you a very precise flavour, we want that yeast from the vineyard to give you all of these nuances, this funkiness in the wine, that little sulphite, that struck match character, or that little bit of mushroomy aroma that comes out. They're all factors that are from the wine, using yeast from the vineyard to ferment. And the character of the wine, therefore, is, especially as a young wine,
more temperamental.
Yeah, slightly more temperamental, but that's
yeah.
I mean, it's the a part of the process of using natural yeast is naturally you can't choose the flavour, the direction in which the yeast is going to take the ferment, but you have to have respect in the style that we're trying to create. You have to let that run its course, and the quality of that wine from the culture of the yeast in that vineyard always just gives us this amazing dynamic without going too far left of centre. Yeah,
it's still an incredible wine. Lovely length of finish, lovely kind of buttery texture as well on the palate. It's got everything, hasn't it? But I just really love them. We should say also we've got the Chardonnay before that as well. We went straight to the Field of Mars, but made the same way with the yeast as well. That Chardonnay, in terms of still got the natural yeast selection. Or?
Yeah, the way that we make this wine is slightly different. The fruit is sourced from 2 vineyards that are within about 10 kilometres of our winery, rather than the single block selection, which is the Field of Mars. And we're looking at a larger blend here, about 6,000 or 7,000, 6,500 bottles, compared to about 1,500 bottles for the Field of Mars. With this, because it is a larger volume, we'll crush up some fruit in the vineyard and start the yeast culture a little bit earlier, fermenting in the vineyard. There's no influence from travel or other yeast, because by the time we bring in the Chardonnay later in the harvest, we might have already had Semillon fermenting in the winery.
Right.
So we don't want that yeast influencing it. So what we do is we crush that fruit in a bucket until it starts to ferment, and then we'll introduce that to a single barrel of the Chardonnay. And once that starts to build up a population, we'll inoculate the Chardonnay barrels using the natural yeast from the vineyard. So it's slower, and it takes a lot more time to manage all of these 60 or so barrels.
Lots of work again then. You'd like to give yourself loads of work to do, don't you? So.
Yeah, well, you make a decision when you want to ferment in oak. You create a huge workload for yourself, but we believe it's really essential to the character of our wines, the integration of that oak flavour. It's something that we make a decision on doing, knowing that it's going to create a lot of work for ourselves. But it's all about a style, a house style. I think when people come to drink Keith Tulloch Wines, they don't expect us to take the easy decisions all the time.
No, and it's worth it in the end. I mean, what food would you put with these wines, would you say?
Yeah, a creamier seafood dish.
Okay, so still going down the seafood route, but with a little bit more weighted.
Yeah, or Chardonnay is a wonderfully versatile wine. Creamy pastas, chicken meals. I mean, quite often vegetarian meals, Asian foods, like that, with something like dumplings and sautéed broccoli in oyster sauce or something.
Nice, so pretty versatile.
Yeah, Chardonnay's I think that Chardonnay is a wonderful, wonderful food wine. And if you were also going for a cheese plate, Chardonnay is great. So
sounds good. I'm getting hungry. Okay, cool. So should we move on? We'll go to the Epigee. This is coming new to us, so this should be new with Boutinot soon. So I think it's good to have a quick chat about that. You already talked about the Marsanne, so just a quick overview on that would be great.
Yeah, this is part of the coming parcel selections. So we make this wine in very small volumes compared to our other wines, about 2,500 bottles.
Okay.
What we're looking at is Marsanne, which is the rogue vines from our estate vineyard, Roussanne, which from this vintage is sourced from the Hilltops area, just near Canberra, and Viognier, which is on our estate, very just opposite to the block of the Sem, but on slightly different soils. As it runs from our Semillon blocks to our Shiraz blocks, there's this run of soil which is sort of half clay and half alluvium, and it's not quite right for reds, it's not quite right for the bright fine whites like Semillon. So we planted Viognier in that vineyard because that's a grape that we use not just in this blend as quite a full-bodied white, but also we use it within the Shiraz wines.
Key part of it, Shiraz, isn't it? We'll get onto that in a second.
Yeah.
But
what we started doing in 2015 was creating this quite textural, full-bodied aromatic blend. We're looking at particularly the Viognier in that blend gives you so much floral character on the nose, and the full-bodied, mouth-filling richness of that wine on the palate's something which makes a real statement.
Yeah.
I think it's the absolute opposite end of the spectrum from the Semillon wines.
Couldn't be any more different, could it? It's got that skin contact as well. It's kind of that red wine making style for the white wine, isn't it? You were saying.
Yeah, and it's something that it's an absolute powerhouse of a wine. It's really dynamic, and while particularly something I'd say to people, you could sell this for 3, 5, maybe even 10 years. But the way we've made that wine is to really deliver something in the glass the moment that you crack it open.
Well, that's what Robin found, right? Our product manager, did he even taste it before he said he wanted some?
He put his nose in the glass and he said he started writing down an order on his piece of paper. It's something where we're still in the history that we have of making wines in the Hunter since 1895. We've been growing Shiraz and Semillon. Since 2015, we've been making this textural white blend. So it's just a baby, and just how much people seem to enjoy the aromatic part of it, but enjoy it as something that's totally different from other wines in the Hunter.
Yeah.
It's probably going to be a big part of what we can do in the future. Those varieties have a lot of promise in our area.
I hope so, because we'll sell out quickly. So you can start
yeah.
We've already got orders from yesterday, haven't we? So
yeah, you're going to have the knocking at the door asking why we don't have more bottles.
Yeah, exactly, which is a good position to be in. But I mean, food match for this with the aromatics, are we thinking more kind of spicy dishes, or where would you go with this for food matching?
Yeah, the one that I had this with recently again was more of that Asian food.
Yeah.
So Thai food.
Yeah.
Like a pad Thai, even something like I love having duck with reds, but when I have a duck curry, I have that.
Okay, cool. Let's give it a go. That sounds good. And it holds up to the spicy aromatics. Like I say, it's a much more powerful white, isn't it? So
yeah, when you've got quite a big spicy Asian dish, it can really ride over some of the characters of something like our Sem. So it's a natural fit.
Sweet. Okay, so we'll move on to the Shiraz then. I know you like talking about Shiraz.
Absolutely love Shiraz.
You love your Shiraz, which is good.
Shiraz. There's a journalist from Australia. His name's Ewan Hook, and he wrote about Dad that he's a Hunter wine man through and through.
Yeah.
Keith Tulloch is a Hunter wine man through and through. So in his veins runs Shiraz, where most of us have blood.
That's a great line.
And I think I was passed that along.
Yeah.
I've got a genetic predisposition to that.
Good.
Yeah, I've got a picture of me standing on the hill of Hermitage when I was 4 years old. think Dad was a bit cross because he tried to take, it was, back in film camera, so you just got one snap of me standing in front of this wonderful Shiraz vineyard, one of the most iconic Shiraz vineyards in the world. And he took that one snap, and he probably didn't realise till he had it developed that I had my hands right down the back of my pants as a little 4-year-old kid. It's something
got back to Oz and developed it.
Yeah.
Bastard. Yeah, absolutely.
It is one of those things where we started off this company in 1998 to make Shiraz wines from a pretty special vineyard that the Kester Shiraz is still sourced from, at the 1923 vineyard. Now, everything about Keith Tulloch Wines, the ability to buy the Semillon vineyards that we have, to make wines of the purity and zest of that, all stemmed off Shiraz winemaking. Okay. And I've been in and around Shiraz winemaking as long as I can remember. Out in the vineyards, with Dad growing the Shiraz, working with the growers out there, going out at 3 a.m. to plunge the cap on the Shiraz during that fermentation in summer. The smell of it, the theatre of it, the dirt, like the graft of getting your hands into it and getting your hands dirty.
I love that photo of the pink cans. How long does that last for in your hands after you've been doing that?
Yeah, from the last couple of years, I'll generally have hands that have in like the grains of your hand, in the creases, you'll have sort of this red wine stain going on until halfway through the year. Okay. And I do both seasons. I do harvest twice a year.
Basically.
So yeah, it's just got clean and I'm about to start harvesting again.
Yeah.
So the getting your hands into the wine is a really important part of red wine winemaking. Whilst that's fermenting, you have so many decisions to make and so much opportunity to extract flavour and to influence the profile of the wine that in winemaking I find it incredibly exciting. And being in Australia, what better place is there to have all of the potential for Shiraz winemaking? It's a beautifully expressive grape that across our country grows in a plethora of different ways. Our style of Hunter Valley Shiraz, and I'm not quite going full LIP compliance here, but I think I'm allowed to say this. The style was known in its early years before the appellation system stopped us from using French regional names on our wines as Hunter River Burgundy, even though the wines were made from Shiraz grapes.
This is recorded, obviously. So.
Yeah, please don't sue me. Yeah, Burgundy. The style of that was a reflection that the wines from the Hunter Valley have a balance that is more medium-bodied. The flavour that the wine delivers at 13.5% to 14% alcohol is incredible. So we won't wait until the wine is 15% alcohol, 14.5%, 15% alcohol. We'll get in there and we'll make a wine which is bright, it's fresh, it's incredibly energetic Shiraz wine that has a way of kind of floating somewhere between a pommard kind of Pinot Noir and something from the Northern Rhone. And that's the style.
The colour when you have it in the glass isn't necessarily what you'd expect, is it?
Yes. Yeah. Some of our wines, particularly the Kester, has a lot of colour, and you think, oh, this is going to be a monster wine. And the character of the wine, I'd say how the Semillon delivers this incredible flavour that's quite light on its feet. The Shiraz, we obviously, it's being a Shiraz, it's still got a lot of body and a lot of presence, but we try and make sure that mouth feel and that delivery isn't aggressive or astringent. It's something that's delivers in a way that's really easy to appreciate. The Shiraz Boutinot, we're trying to give that wine by co-fermenting with 5% Boutinot, this aromatic X factor that Boutinot can deliver. As it's it's the second variety, this Epigee blend, but its aromatics completely dominate the wine.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's 5% in this blend, and the aromatic lift that it gives is.
So what it does is it just lifts the aromatics in the wine itself.
Yeah. It subtly changes the wine from the kind of cherry and black spice and sort of peppery aromas that people normally associate with Shiraz. It lifts those and just gives them this floral element: red rose petal, lavender, violets.
Okay.
That's for me a Shiraz Viognier. I want, when I'm drinking it, I want to leave that last bit in the glass.
Yeah.
I never want to touch it because then I might not be able to sit there and smell it anymore.
You really like Shiraz, don't you?
Yeah,
It's good.
Yeah, my veins pulse with this stuff. So aromatically, that wine's just has so much to offer.
Yeah.
And the Shiraz Viognier on the palate, Viognier helps to soften the wine while it's young. So rather than saying lay it down for a few years, keep it in your cellar until 2020 something, we can say to people, you can take that home, crack it open, and even if you don't do that, the wine will age nicely. But if you do, then the wine's got so much to offer as a young beverage.
Okay. And what would you have with it? What kind of food? I think it's just important to get an idea of the kind of food you like with this.
Yeah, with the Shiraz Viognier, I'd say anything that's red. Anything that's red meat,
Okay.
Or like if you were looking at a vegetarian dish, something like a moussaka.
Yeah. People often forget vegetarian dishes, don't they? When you think, I always do, you do wine training, you kind of, this is great with this meat, but vegetarian dishes are also essential to pair with.
Yeah, if you're looking at something vegetarian like tomato and mushroom soup, or like a moussaka or a vegetarian lasagna or something with tomato, tomato-based Italian food, with or without meat, would be great with that wine. Then it really has the flavour intensity to step up and bring something to like even brisket or like quite heavy meats. That thing can do a lot with any of your heavier darker foods.
Okay.
It'll give you a real lift to the meal.
And how much oak are we talking with this one?
That wine it sees about 12 months.
Okay.
Give or take a week or two. It sees 12 months in about 20% brand new French oak.
So a mixture of fills then, so new oak and
with that wine we'll use up to 5 fills. So being 20%, you have the 20% moves on next year and is the first fill and then the second, third. So from it you'll get 20% first year, 20% second year, down to 5th year.
Okay, cool. Anything else before we move on to the final wine?
No, I think I'm pretty excited to talk about the...
We drank this last night, it was good, wasn't it? It was pretty special.
Yeah, I had people last night who were planning to drink this at their 50th.
Yeah.
And they were just hitting in their late 30s. So it's always great when people say, I'm going to drink that at this really special event that's a decade away or more. I can already look forward to getting the Instagram tag on that. But I actually
would be way up there in 20 years' time. So.
I think something really interesting about social media is that we do. Sometimes you kiss the wine goodbye when it leaves the door, and we absolutely love making these wines. We get to enjoy them, but when people tag us in stuff that they're enjoying, it just lights us up as winemakers. You see someone that's having a 15-year-old Shiraz for their 50th birthday or for a really special event, and they've chosen your wine. People will remember those events for the rest of their lives. Really important.
It's such a show of gratitude to you, isn't it? Really, because they're showing how much they love your wines, and it's great that you see that. So.
Yeah, and so that's an important thing, and one of the reasons that we make wines that have the ability to age, and that's a big part of the culture of what we do, is because we want to create that experience for somebody. It is, if you boil it down to it, it's just a beverage. It's just a drink, right? But for us, it's so much more. For us, it's a moment in time, sealed. So when people come back and they have that 2014 wine, they get a picture of what was happening that year. And if anybody still reads the newspaper, when you buy a bottle of wine, wrap it in the newspaper from the day. Don't just chuck it out. wrap it in the newspaper and put it in a box or put it in the cellar.
Yeah.
And then when you open up the wine, you get to have a look what was happening in 2018.
Yeah, that's a cracking idea. I like that.
Yeah. I've got to say I stole that from Dad.
Yeah, it's passed down, isn't it? It's good
just
information
another
passed
piece of
down.
experience.
So this wine then, what makes it so special to you?
Well, the vineyard has quite a long history, even before my father was born. It's a piece of our family history. It was owned by my great grandfather, James Tulloch. It's a vineyard that's about 10 kilometres from where our estate is, just around the corner of the mountains, so it's a little bit more sheltered from coastal sort of maritime showers in summer. Tends to deliver a little bit more of a full-bodied Shiraz, so generally we see the Kester being about 14.5% alcohol. And the age of those vines being planted in 1923, dry grown on this colluvial black sort of broken down sandstone and gravel, has an influence on the wine that's seriously profound. It just has this intensity of cherry, which is the Shiraz varietal character that we all go crazy for, that intense black cherry and black currant. That's what it delivers. It just delivers the variety's pure heartbeat in such a way and in such a concentration. It's amazing. Being such old vines that are unirrigated, the yield can drop up. It can vary quite seriously from year to year. So years like 2014 and 2018 just gone by, being so dry, the yield of the vine drops. You've got very small berries.
Yeah.
But when we're fermenting that, the skin contact that it has when the berries are quite small, you've got less juice but more skin. And so all of the flavour of all of those skins is extracted during the fermentation. So what you end up with from those old vines is such intense colour, incredibly intense flavour, and that builds the structure and the kind of core of the wine that will stay in this for as long as you can imagine.
Yeah.
This 2014 Kester Shiraz.
How many bottles are we talking about?
You're looking at 6,500 bottles.
Right.
6.5. And as I said, that quantity can fluctuate greatly depending on the year. But the wine's core flavour will remain bright and fresh for decades to come. The cellaring potential of this by the James Halliday, our most prominent wine writer in Australia, I believe for this vintage was 2048. And he tends to go on the safe side with his predictions because people hold him up to that.
Yeah, I'm sure you feel it could age longer. I mean, that's the reality, isn't it? But
I'll safely say to anyone that has one in 2048, you wouldn't be too sad if you opened it and enjoyed it then. But as I said, with all of our wines, we want people to have the confidence to keep this as long as they choose. Having this last night and opening it up, people were blown away. And if they took that bottle home and opened it tomorrow, they'd be really happy as well. That's why we wait a bit longer to release this one compared to the other wines. Yeah. We'll take the time to cellar it properly in our own winery, so that people they have to make the decision on how long do I want to keep it, not how long should I keep it. Yeah. So, it's a good conundrum to be faced with, isn't it? So yeah. What we do with the oak handling of that wine is a little bit different as well. So we're using about 20% new oak, very high quality barrels for the Shiraz Viognier. But this we're using about a third new oak, so 30 to 33%. And that uses the very finest French oak barrels, 3 or 4 year air dried barrels from Francois Frere, Saury, and from Troy.
Not particularly cheap then?
No.
Good quality stuff.
You're looking at a couple of €1,000 per barrel at least, with a life cycle of 3 years. So when we're looking at the oak that we put into this wine, it's absolutely no expense spared. And we try and use larger barrels because this sees time in oak for longer. The sort of integration of that oak flavour using 500 and 600 litre barrels is is pretty special. Using the smaller barrels, it's a larger contact area. You can tend to start to laminate those flavors a little bit, and we want that core of the cherry and blackcurrant flavour.
You don't want it overpowering, you want it to, like I said, harmonise together. Really,
yeah.
Giving that bigger surface area.
Yeah, you don't want, like, when something's laminated, you can still see it, but it's kind of underneath that glaze.
Yeah.
We still want that wine to have all of that character from the Shiraz fruit, with the oak flavour as a complexity that's behind it and supporting it, and not over the top of it.
Okay.
I think that you could oak this for a lot longer; it would still look gorgeous. The fruit's a pretty special resource, but what we do is we just pull that back a bit.
Tell us about Kester before we move on to the Boutinot Semillon. So the name, just think it's quite important to talk about.
Yeah, so I might just get you to sit that down.
I can do that.
Thanks. So this is a bit of a look back at the history of us in the area. We only started the company in 1997, but it's a reflection of the family history that we have, and actually is directly pointing to a matriarch of our winemaking in the region. Florence Kester was the maiden name of my great-great-grandmother.
Right.
So she married John Uni Tulloch, and that was the partnership that started J.Y. Tulloch and Sons, which was that first family company that we had in the area as a family. That kind of support and that kind of work that she did in building a family dynasty probably doesn't get the recognition it deserves. Could go into politics and things like that, but we won't.
It's a lovely nod to her and the support behind the scenes that invariably been given to the business throughout the decades.
Yeah, the importance that my mum Amanda has to our business is absolutely endless. She's, what would we be without the spine of the business?
Yeah,
and the work that she's put in to make Keith Tulloch Wines possible. From the very start, Dad wanted to recognise the work that the women had done in the family since the foundation unto now. And Kester has also been passed down and used as a name in our family, mostly as a second name for the gentleman along generations. There was actually a winemaker in the 1960s whose name was Keith Kester Tulloch, and he made some wines that we're still drinking today.
Yeah.
So that name then has a pretty deep, profound meaning.
Yeah, so it means a lot on many levels. I think I really like that.
Yeah, and that story's on the back label if you ever forget.
So we've got to the end of the bottle, we can have a little read on the back. So.
Yeah. I think it's a huge thing to recognise.
Great. So we'll move on to the last wine. Our Master Sommelier Nigel absolutely loves this wine, and why wouldn't he? And we do sell out because it's so popular. It's such a lovely wine. So just a quick chat about this, and then we'll ask you a few kind of key interviewing questions before we finish off.
Oh no, you're
going to
grill
into
me.
the hard stuff again. Just tell us about this quickly.
Yeah, so we're looking now at the style of Semillon, which the grape variety has been known traditionally for hundreds and hundreds of years. Botrytis Sauternes, made from Semillon grapes, have been the great sweet wine of Bordeaux for countless generations. So the grape has an obvious quality for making dessert-style wines that are affected by botrytis. What we do is we'll just choose a portion of our Semillon grapes that we'll leave out on the vine past when all of the reds are harvested to pick up a percentage of sugar in the grape that's about 20 to 25% at the date of harvest. Okay. So they're looking at an alcohol potential if you fermented that away to about 20 or
pretty high.
Yeah, 25% or something. So we'll ferment about half of that sugar, roughly. So the end wine has about 10% alcohol, and the rest of that natural grape sugar that's unfermented gives you that fullness of flavour, that sweetness, that dessert wine style. given that the 2017 year in the Hunter was it was the start of our drought in the area, so it's been incredibly hot and dry there since the start of 2016. What we've seen in that wine is a delicate expression of that apricot and marzipan. In our Boutinot wines that we've been making since 2001, the hot years tend to have a lot of that really caramelly butterscotch honey flavour, and the lighter years the wetter, cooler years tend to give you so much of that marzipan-y, apricot-y Boutinot character. So on this scale of what we do, it's one of the more honeyed ones. But
it still carries a wonderful freshness as well, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, it's been the important backbone of all of our Boutinot wines the whole time we've been making them, that they have to have the check and balance in having that amazing expression and intensity of flavour that you can get from the natural sugar without being sickly. The wine still has the acidity and the structure to shape the wine, to clean the palate, so that you're not left with that kind of gloopy, sickly sweetness. You could easily have that wine with vanilla bean, ice cream, a rich chocolate pudding, or you could have it with cheese. It's surprisingly versatile as a dessert wine style, and that is probably it is being half bottles. It'd be about 3,000 bottles in a year, 3,000 or 4,000 bottles. It's hard to remember to put it in 375 mils. The 2017 vintage, I think we made actually quite a lot of, considering the year was so good for Boutinot wine. I think there's actually about 5,000 bottles of that.
Cool.
But the recognition of that style from the press in what we do on a technical point of view has also been really, really amazing. I think it's one of Matthew Jukes' favourite dessert wines as well.
And Nigel's, which is as important as Matthew Jukes, I'm sure.
Yeah, yes, absolutely.
Listen, I mean, I think, we love your wines. We've always loved working with you, and I think all the wines are a testament to what you do year in, year out, and it's just great for people to get a chance to know you. I could talk to you all day and get all wine nerdy, but we'll have to wrap it up. So just a few quick questions. So spotlight on Tulloch. So this is where it gets difficult for you. Okay, real tough question. I've made some notes. So I think I already know the answer to this. Shiraz or Sem?
Shiraz.
Easy. It's just easy as that.
Didn't even blink.
Yeah, fine. Okay, cool. If you could work elsewhere, if you had a chance, you'd work somewhere else instead of Hunter Valley, where would it be?
Hermitage.
Hermitage, that's it?
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. What would you do if you weren't a winemaker?
Sommelier.
You'd be a sommelier, so you'd still be in wine, definitely, 100%.
100%.
What would you do if it wasn't in wine?
I guess I'd have to be a brewer.
Yeah, get the picture.
Yeah, somebody asked me if somebody came and took one of your senses, your hearing, your sight, or your taste, what would it be? I said, take my sight.
Fantastic. That's a great question. I'll use that next time. It's so important.
I'd never give up that.
Yeah.
Love it.
Fantastic. Favourite food?
Lamb. Roast
lamb. Okay. Roast lamb.
Aussie roast lamb.
Got the castor on the side.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Too bad with it. Favourite wine?
1990 La Chapelle, Paul Jablayan, the best wine I've had in my life.
Fantastic. Is there anything particularly you really liked about it, or just?
It has ethereal life. It's just, it's been the best wine I've had at every time I've looked at it. Since it was one of the first wines that made me fall in love with wine.
Okay.
When Dad came back from working at that winery in the 1990s, he had a box of La Chapelles. Lucky. Yeah. That wine just ignited my love for Shiraz in a pretty profound way, and even now that the wine, which is almost 30 years old, you sit it on a table, and anywhere that you go, anything that you do, no matter what's sitting next to it, it could be, I won't annoy French winemakers by naming regions or brands, but it's one of the greatest wines of all time.
Great stuff. So I know you like football, okay, and I actually don't care about the answer to this question because I'm a Liverpool fan. But seeing as Boutinot, born and bred Manchester, are you Man United or Man City? What would you go for?
I'd have to go United.
You have to go United.
Yeah.
I mean, I still don't care, but that's good that you chose one. So.
Yeah, have to go United. Which I am still a Liverpool fan, by the way. That's nothing again.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah.
I didn't even know this. This is great.
Yeah. No. To be honest, being not from Liverpool myself, but just following the team, couldn't really care less about the rivalry between Man U and Man City.
Yeah.
Or the rivalry between Man U and Liverpool.
Okay.
But I just admire Man U and their fans.
Nice. So I'll rephrase the question. Even though we're from Manchester as a company, Man United or Liverpool?
Liverpool.
Excellent. See, that's great. No, obviously it was going to be Liverpool, but it's good to chat. Just wanted to get it on record. So.
Yes.
Okay, so a couple more questions and we'll wrap it up. So, what is next for Keith Tulloch? So we had a chat about vine density. Okay,
Yep.
so is that kind of the next thing, or is there something else on the horizon?
Yeah, it's what we're. There's probably two different things that go together, and it's all about the vineyard. So we've got the vine density. So what we've been doing with some new parts of our vineyard with Chardonnay is increasing the number of vines per acre, trying to give those vines more competition and deliver a higher intensity of flavour per vine, which is a pretty exciting prospect with any grape variety. It's all about flavour intensity. And so we've planted vineyards that are higher density since 2015, and just looking at the results and the fruit that delivers. So what we can do in our vineyards with the team that we have to work hands-on in small parcels at very high densities, pretty exciting.
Yeah.
The stock that we're planting that with is clonal selections that my grandfather's been working on since he was 25 or 26.
Dr. Tulloch.
Dr. Harry Tulloch, yeah. So he has a PhD from his work with clonal selections. He's been choosing the strongest vines from the strongest vineyards and then propagating those up and choosing the strongest vines from those strongest vines from the strongest vineyards since the 1950s.
Okay, and so he's kind of responsible for the spread of Shiraz of that clone around Australia, isn't he? So
yeah, so there's a clone called SA 1654. It's the most planted Shiraz vine in Australia, and it was isolated from what were called the Nuri trials from Nuri in South Australia in the late 1950s when he was working there for the Department of Agriculture. So yeah, even some of the vineyards that we don't own but we buy fruit from, they use the vines that he isolated and propagated all those years ago. So the thing about that is that he has still continued doing those trials his entire life on his own vineyards, even after he left research viticulture. So he has some of the strongest clones of Shiraz, some of the strongest actual planting material to put in the ground that we can imagine. And that's what's going to the ground now at Keith Tulloch, and has for about the last 10 years.
fantastic.
So the quality of the vineyard just keeps getting better.
Just exciting things to come even more.
Yeah, that's right. So that's the future. It's all vineyard.
The future's exciting. Cool.
All right.
Yeah. Final one. If you had to pick one of these wines to really kind of showcase Keith Tulloch and kind of tell the story of Keith Tulloch, which one would it be?
Kester 2014.
Yeah, I thought it may be, but you know, I want to put it out there. So
Yeah,
that's it.
it's not only is it our signature wine, and it carries all of that influence that I've been talking to you about. 2014 was one of the great vintages that we've had from our region. It easily be vintage of the decade, so that wine's got a pretty exciting future.
I'm sure you have too. So thank you very much for your time, mate.
Thanks, Adam.
Cheers.
Pleasure.